It costs them $4.50. It would be optimal for the driver, though, because the driver is probably going to get tipped on the basis of the total amount of the trip, which includes the toll. And the driver's going to save a minute of time, which they're going to get to use to get to the next fare. So that's very interesting results. And obviously, the other thing you can do with this data is you can study infinitely different types of micro markets. And I'm just going to rattle through a few images of small subsector. We talked about airport markets. We talked about different types of markets in the data. You can actually see it and analyze it now. That's the Union Square data that Dave was talking about. The Union Square is a very small area. This is where Bobby Flay has his restaurant, and it's a big restaurant area, also a big green market. And we actually subsetted the data. That was pulled out mathematically. That box is pulled out mathematically based on longitude and latitude. And there's the origin. This is the origins from Union Square. The coloring is by day of week. We could do it by hour of day. We could do it by, I could study the bar traffic at night, whatever. There's the destinations. Notice much pretty broad portfolio of destinations out of it. You can also look at the mix of origin destination, and you can see whether or not an area is an origin hotspot or a destination hotspot. And then you notice, of course, the two red blocks in the outer boroughs there. Those are the two airports. That's LaGuardia on the top and JFK on the bottom. You can get into very, very low details and see whether or not there's patterns of behavior, how people are moving around, and where are the hot origin points. Obviously, if you're a taxi driver, you want to go to the origin points because that's where you're going to get a fare. But you can also use it for dumb probe data. And what we call a dumb probe is when you actually use some sort of data systems collecting data to get some ideas of traffic flow. And we were considering having a congestion pricing zone, but we can actually load the origin destination from the taxi data into our traffic flow modeling and actually get an idea of where taxi cabs are causing the most amount of congestion and traffic in the city. And obviously you can see certain areas in Manhattan where this is pretty high. The darker the line, more purple the line is, that the central lines are on like 6th and 7th Avenue. A considerable amount of the traffic that's actually on the road network is actually taxi traffic. You can also see, by the way, that the bridge there going across on the off Manhattan to the airport is pretty congested. And that's the toll route of the Queens Midtown Tunnel. The other thing is that we had a big discussion. We were talking about doing this congestion pricing zone. Huge discussion about the average speed of traffic in Manhattan, and we don't have good sensor data. We didn't have a good way of telling you how fast cars are going. Well, the taxis are real helpful because I can pull out the data just for during the peak period of hour. Or I could even look at certain types of trips going on certain streets, and I could give you an idea based upon the origin and destination as to what will be the traffic flow. And we basically find that during the peak period, the average speed on the city streets is about 11 miles an hour. And that's really important, both from the point of view if we're going to propose a congestion zone, and there is what the zone was going to look like. It was going to be Manhattan south to 59th Street. That one's actually 80th, the original one. And the question is, of course, obviously the taxi data can both inform the users of taxis, it can inform people who operate taxis, it can inform the regulators of taxis, but also it can even do broader things like inform the city about how well the congestion pricing zone is working. And this is basically available free because of Matt's contract there. This data is available for the city to use to establish how the congestion pricing zone is functioning. And since it's being taken 500,000 observations a day, it really could tell us how these programmatic changes would actually impact traffic flow and operations. So even beyond this industry, it's really a fascinating data set. And I'm happy to go back and look at anything if you'd like to see it again. I made it. One more.
I'm just going to make a very short presentation. It's sort of summing up what's already been said. I'm going to start by just reminding you I'm James Cooper. I'm a taxi academic from Scotland. Scotland, the rainy part of the UK, which is why we stole whiskey from the Irish. I used to think I was the only taxi academic. I'm delighted to say now that I know I'm not. But I do think it's very important that we recognize the need for taxi research, and also significant that we ask why we are doing it and what we can learn from it. We're here in a room of practitioners and regulators, and to me that's perfect. You are the very people whose expertise, inquiry and interest is essential to develop the research, to see the results, and look around you in this place at the presentations, at the posters, tell me if we're doing the right things, and tell me where we're doing it wrong. Without the trade, without the profession, without regulators, there is no research. And I'm just going to take a very few minutes to present the role that I think taxi research can play amongst other forms of transport. Okay, I'm going to start by saying, well, what is transport research? And it's fairly fundamental that we talk about this. It's not even easy to say transport is a discipline in its own right. It's a multidisciplinary subject, and it draws from many different areas. This both complicates it and makes it beneficial at the same time. And over the years, we've seen engineering aspects of transport, social, economic, even psychological. And all of these have contributed to the discipline that we know today. For the hard engineers amongst you, you may recognize the split between road-based private transport and route-based public transit. The economists will be thinking about public and private, supported or self-sustaining. Modes have also emerged as a focal point for the range of disciplines of which we speak. We see air, rail, bus, private car as mainstream, commonplace even. We see slow modes, which is a euphemism for cycling and walking, and they're also out there, but not so much the taxi. This is not a scheduled mode, so not directly calculable as a predictable carrier, and it's not really a private mode, so it's much harder to define in terms of origins and destinations. In short, it's a mode that has fallen between the disciplines of transport and is not central to any. But here I want to say I'm not ready to write off the taxi. Quite the reverse. Here we need to recognize the presence of the taxi in our transport infrastructure. The taxi mode is and must be recognized as the significant contributor to mobility that it is. Moreover, given the presence of the mode in all cities, in all countries, completing pretty well the same role in much the same way, it should surprise us that there is as little research out there as there is. Here, for example, is the mode of choice late at night, often the only choice late at night. The mode that offers the first and last miles in a trip chain, and the first and last mode seen by many travellers in visiting a new location. My impression of your city is based on the friendly chat with a taxi driver from the airport, or maybe the unexpectedly high $80 fare I paid for the 15-mile journey. For the benefit of my continued survival in this room, I highlight that this fare is entirely made up and not reflective of any of the cities that I have visited. Let us not forget the role of the taxi in social transport, a little accepted fact that the taxi plays a greater role in transporting low-income families than in high-income trips. Well-designed systems solve problems, contribute to mobility, even reduce disturbances in the small hours of weekend mornings. Equally so, systems can contribute to congestion, affect gridlock, and pollute. Here then the basis for a thoughtful process for research and transfer of results. Okay. Here it is appropriate to highlight the clear relationships between practice and research, both theoretical and applied. It is a symbiotic relationship. Both are needed, research to support practice and practice to inform research. I personally am not happy with a research project paper that remains dusty on a shelf. nor am I satisfied with the mantra that suggests that a practice that has existed since the 1847 Town Police Clauses Act makes a good practice. Research in transport that excludes taxis highlights the fact that the mode is hidden, not the fact that it does not deserve research. Research needs to contribute to solutions, however indirectly. To contribute to solutions, an understanding is required of current issues, and an understanding requires a dialogue between operators, regulators, and researchers. See if you spot the Doctor Who reference. Having spent the preceding slides in making a case for taxi research and dialogue within the industry, now let me share with you some of the research directions that I know to be happening and could be happening. Around you today you will see examples of work in posters and papers, and we see examples of work looking at impacts of fares, impacts on the public, and impacts on the driver. We see papers over many years about the structure of the industry and its potential for reform. In context, we can speculate on the role of a state without money supporting public transport and the potential of the taxi industry to supply services. I reject the idea that public transit is somehow stuck in the 1980s. It is alive and well right now, and the taxi has a role in this. Where do taxi technologies take us? Are we jumping for joy at the location and use of location information? Or are we frightened of the impacts of knowing who is where, when, and why? How do we deal with jurisdictional overlaps, whether geographical or administrative? In time, boundaries may work to our advantage, whether in making them more blurred or more distinct. What role do our airports have in contributing standards beyond those of the cities they serve? Indeed, let's be clear, airports continue to challenge supply with expectations of service and, in some cases, the peculiarity of two-way empty running. Sustainability, whether economic or ecological, and the role of the taxi socially, from shops, physically in infrastructure, and practically at night. These are just a few of the current research projects around you. Okay, in concluding, I have a few slides here making the case for taxi research in dialogue with the industry, with the profession. Let me now share with you some of the research I know to be happening. You see examples of the work in papers and posters of taxi research, and we have examples of work looking at impacts of fares, impacts on the public. We speculate on the role of a state without money, and we see technologies taking us forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to talk to you, but we need to listen to you. I invite you to challenge us and inquire where we go next. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn over to the floor and invite our speakers here to present and talk. Thank you.
Okay, we heard a little bit about what's going on. Does anybody have any questions or comments on where we should go? Jeffrey?
Yeah, I'm very interested in everything what the speakers have to say, but I'm going to pick on Professor Peters specifically, if you don't mind. Very interesting you were talking